Hello and good morning, everybody, and welcome to Action Circles. It is October 17th, 2020, and today is the first gathering of this new Action Circle cycle about the political compass and fundamental liabilities, which was being guided today by Alex Weissenfels, who is our existential philosopher and all-around amazing person who we are excited to learn from again. So yesterday was the new moon, which is the time of the month that we set our intentions for the coming month. The full moon this month is on October 31st on Halloween, which I always like when those things line up, because that's when the werewolves come out. And so I'm very excited for what this Action Circle cycle is going to bring. And how we're going to utilize what we learn to take more effective action in our lives. So today I want to share a couple observances with you. Today is Eminem's birthday, which is very personally meaningful to me, and I will share with you about that in just a moment. It's also Pay Back a Friend Day, so if there are any friends out there that you owe something to, it doesn't have to be money that you're paying back, just, might be something that they gave to you. So you did give that back. And it's also coming to the end of Bone and Joint Health National Action Week. So please take care of your bones and your joints. As we are getting older, it's important to stay flexible and limber and get out there and stay active, so you don't find yourself, when you're 60, all like crinkled up and curmudgeon-y, because that causes pain, and pain causes suffering, and suffering causes all sorts of sad things to happen. So listen to what I say. Do yoga. It's good for your soul and everything else. So my name is Abigail Twyman, and I'm joining you today from the home I share with my partner, Dustin, and our dog, Ter Zeppelin, in the community of Knockety Bay. Our Alaskan oasis is located on Prince of Wales Island in Southeast Alaska, which is located in Tlingit-Ani, the land of the Tlingit people, which they also shared with the Haida and Tsimshian people, specifically in what is the ancestral homeland of the people of the Tuxacan or Coast Town tribe. I'm honored to be able to share this space with my ancestors and the ancestors of those indigenous to the land I currently inhabit, who fill my soul with the fire that fuels my action. I'm dedicated to remembering forward and passing along their immense wisdom for the benefit of future generations and the protection of our shared home. I am also deeply honored to be able to share this space with the beautiful humans and change catalysts who have been inspired and empowered to join our pod. I'm dedicated to using the privileged body I was born into and this platform to catalyze collective action, and I thank you for your commitment to acting in the service of creating peace for yourself, your family, your community, and all inhabitants of Mother Earth. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to share something, because I told you that it was Eminem's birthday, and so he's an artist who was so important to me in my life and in my journey of personal recovery. And his music didn't get brought into my life until I met my partner, Dustin, in 2003, that fateful day. And in my own personal journey of recovery, there were 4 songs of his that I put on a playlist. And whenever I was feeling like down and like, oh, I can't go any further, I would put on that playlist, and it would kind of inspire me to feel better. And so some of you know that I'm an aspiring musician, and I'm a creative writer, and I like to write songs. And so I created a little mashup that is my like call to action. So I wanted to share that with you for his birthday, and also in honor of the fact that there are marches and demonstrations going on right now all across the United States, potentially the world. I haven't been on the news yet to see how far things are spreading, but there's a lot of social and political change happening. And so I thought this all worked together really well talking about political compass and fundamental liabilities. It's Eminem's birthday. His recovery album inspired me. We've got marches going on. And so I want to share this little song with you, with the world, for Eminem and his birthday. So sit back, relax, and try to enjoy. Let me take a breath and get ready. We're going through changes. Don't know what we're gonna do. We just keep on going through changes. But we're not afraid to take a stand. Everybody, come take our hands. We'll walk this world together through the storm, whatever weather, cold or warm, just letting you know that you're not alone. Holler if you feel like you've been down the same road. Throw dirt on us and grow a wildflower. Some say fuck the world, it'll never change it. Yeah, we've seen some shit, but now it's time to act, yo. Had our knees on necks. Can't say we didn't know though. We're mourning George and too many others tried to play the game, but they broke the rules. That's why our bars are full of broken bottles and our nightstands are full of open Bibles. We think about more than we forget. It's time to use our fire, push for change and make them start to sweat. We know it's a little too late to say that we're sorry now. We kicked you when you were down, and our inaction left scars. We showed you nothing but hate. We sat in silence and watched. But now, time is out now. No more excuses. It's time to take action. There's a storm coming that the weatherman couldn't predict. We've started to move shit. Things better change cause we are ticked. It's a wrap, we were down. When we were down, we were kicked. We got up. We catch a flow and get going. No remorse are we showing. Ain't slowing for no one. There's nothing they can do to stop us. We zero in on our target like a marksman, and the target is hate. We fill your cup up, honor you, and celebrate. Black Lives Matter, just transition, humanist, what will we do? Go get your crew, make a plan, and let's start to move. Together we are strong enough to make change, and for good to unite the masses and put this world back together with glue. Now guess what? Hey, time is up. Hey, we protest with our pods, wielding our voices too. We're in your ear, we're in your face, we're all up in your psyche too. Who are we? Humans, beautiful humans. The end. Thank you for listening. Happy birthday, Eminem. I don't know how old you are today, but I love you. So with that, I will pass the mic on to the one and only Alex Weissenfels to set our intentions for this action circle cycle and to establish our agreements and get us going with our new learning and new applications. Off to you.
Thanks, Abby. Here we go. Let's see. So, Action Circle is all about learning how to have more effective conversations around challenging topics, as well as effectively collaborating with others who share our mission, vision, and values. When we come to Circle, we assume all the answers to our questions here are within the circle, because we brought the right group of people together with a collective wealth of knowledge and experience. Our guiding theory is that our respective change efforts within our personal and professional lives, as well as our movements and organizations, have had limited impact on the overall trajectory of the data. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us to adjust our approach. By bringing voices together and guiding the conversation in a new yet very old way, we have the potential to develop plans of action which are much more likely to get us to the end goal, a truly just, equal, and peaceful world, the way it used to be and the way it always should have been. Our goal is to catalyze the spread of action circles across the world in the service of creating peace through collective action. Let's see, so today we're talking about the political compass of liabilities, helping people understand why other people disagree with them. And before we do that, we need to establish the agreements here. Here we go. While every action circle will be recorded and made public, the stories shared within the circle should only be shared in a way that protects, uplifts, inspires, and empowers others. 2, we listen for understanding, are mindful of how our words and actions impact the flow of the circle, and take responsibility for addressing any hurts that we may cause. 3, we know we won't solve these complex problems overnight and are committed to learning and unlearning so we can be more impactful with our actions. 4, from time to time, we will pause to regather our thoughts or focus. Silent counsel can be called for by any member of the circle using the chat function. We can say, waste, why am I still talking? Or Yelmo, good enough, let's move on. Number 5, the chat function is reserved for contributions from those who choose typing as their preferred mode of communication, and for gems or quotes harvested by scribes, any member of the circle. Also, you are always welcome to pass by saying pass or typing pass in the chat. And number 6, whenever possible, we take a pause before speaking and use sound verbal behavior, measured and deliberate speech, when sharing our perspectives with the circle. So we'll make our first round in the circle to establish the agreements and check in. So the introduction, land acknowledgement, acknowledge the agreements, and the question for today is, what makes you feel safe? So I'll start. I'm Alex Weissenfels, an eccentric existentialist philosopher and applied engineer of concepts. Let's see, I reside in Madison, Wisconsin, originally settled and inhabited by the Ho-Chunk people. I acknowledge the agreements. And what makes me feel safe is knowing that people are paying attention to the different liabilities, the different problems that we can face, and that they've decided to make sure that through their efforts that we're working on fixing or preventing problems. And I pass to Sheena.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sheena Trait. I live in Tucson, Arizona, Southern Arizona, originally inhabited by the Tohono O'odham people. I live here with my husband, Ryan, and my 2 children, Cora and Rainer, and our puppy, Ruby. I am a positive behavior analyst, yogi, mom, wife, and I'm wondering if that's different every week or if it's the same, but anyway. And I acknowledge the agreements. And the thing that makes me feel safe is knowing that there are human beings in the world that are striving for peace. I pass to Mary. Sorry, Mary.
Thank you, Sheena. I'm Mary Wong, ESL teacher, so teacher of international students and students in their own countries from all over the world for over 40 years, which puts me well in the bones falling apart category and joints aching. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, initially inhabited by the Ho-Chunk. I enthusiastically embrace the agreements of this group. I feel safe when surrounded by people I trust And when I know that the people in my immediate environment are going to not actively harm me. I pass to, is it Nancy? Yeah, I'm passed to Nancy.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Nancy. I live in Phoenix. I acknowledge the agreement stated earlier. I'm sorry, that's Alexa. Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. I acknowledge that our home is located on the ancestral and unceded traditional territories of the Akimel, Oram, and Hohokam people. And what makes me feel safe is people in my life that encourage me and my children. And the next person is Abby.
Hello, thank you. My name is Abigail Twyman. I'm a humanistic behavioral scientist, creative writer, and data-driven optimist. I acknowledge I am on the ancestral and unceded traditional territory of the indigenous peoples of Alaska, specifically Tlingit Ani, traditional homeland of the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people. I absolutely acknowledge the agreements. And what makes me feel safe is when I am surrounded by people I can trust will catch me effectively and safely when I start to fall. So I can, not be hurt and be surrounded by loving arms until I'm feeling better. And then I trust that I feel safe being able to be that person for others as well. And I will pass it back to Alex.
Thanks, everyone. Let's see, I brought a centerpiece here, so I'll go ahead and share the screen. So I'll make sure I'm doing things in the right order. Here we go. Here we go. So this is a centerpiece that I found on Pixabay. And I picked this because it represents people working together, even though they probably believe different things, they feel different things, they have different hopes and fears, and yet they know that by working together, they can achieve the hopes of both of them, and they can defend each other against their fears. And so all they really need to do is understand and trust each other, and then it doesn't matter if everything else about them is different. And so it just has a bunch of related words in the hands. And I did also bring a song. I don't think I will be able to hear it, but I can play the song. Let's see. Here we go. So this is a song that describes the reason that I put together these tools in the toolbox. This is World So Cold by 12 Stones. So we can just relax and listen to the lyrics and think about what they mean to you.
Alex, we don't have the
Everyone
audio.
here?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Go to the advanced, if you do the share screen advanced settings.
Yes, let's see. Let's go over here. I don't
There's
have that
unobtrusive little box that just below when you try to share screen that says share computer audio.
I don't think I have that.
Are you in the app?
No, I'm in,
okay, then I can help you. If you go to share screen.
Yep.
Is that
Oh,
what you,
okay, let's try that. Okay, so I don't use the chevron. I just, there we are. Okay, so I got confused there. Here we go.
so I
Try
think
that
you have
one
to have
now.
the tab open when you share.
How's that? Okay, so the guys still won't be able to hear it, but you can hear it. So here we go. There we go. So that is the song. And I chose that because it encapsulates how I feel about seeing people who can't understand each other's differences try and fight each other when I can understand both of them. And so I hope that with this action circle, it'll help everyone understand each other. I do also have a charity shout out. I'd like to shout out to Humanity Forward, the charity organization founded by Andrew Yang, for putting together policies that work for everyone, that fix things that affect the big picture and the long term, while also helping people in the here and now. And with that, let's get started with the political compass of fundamental liabilities. So we're gathered here together in October to talk about fear. Fear that divides us and creates mistrust and hatred. Our fear comes from the problems that we face, and so we must understand these problems in order to put our fears and each other's fears to rest. Only then can we build the trust and cooperation that we need to actually solve these problems. Every problem that we face can be described in terms of one or more of the following concepts. These four concepts are explained by the intersections of known or unknown and physical or mental, mental being goal-based problems. This sounds obvious, but we'll get to the part where it helps us figure things out. Here we go. I also have pictures that pertain to these. And share. Is it sharing? Yes, it is. There we are. Excellent. So the first fundamental liability is scarcity, known physical obstacles. You run out of gas, you run out of food, you run out of time, you're not strong enough, fast enough, there's a wall in the way that you can't climb over. Scarcity represents material obstacles that you're already aware of when what you have isn't good enough to get over them. But it's a fundamental liability because it's an intrinsic part of conscious existence as we know it. It also represents stability. Scarcity is just stability that works against what we want. But we do want stability to exist because it holds the world together. These known barriers are what keep everything around us from evaporating. That's the first fundamental liability. And then the second is disaster, unknown or unpredictable physical obstacles. These are the walls that we don't know are there until we hit them. Or we might know they're there somewhere, but we don't know when we're going to hit them. Something breaks, we make a mistake, power goes out, someone gets sick, something gets lost, something doesn't work out the way you thought it would. Once you're aware that a disaster has happened, it can become a scarcity since it's a known obstacle. But the process of hitting something that you weren't aware was there. That's disaster. But this is also fundamental liability because it is the flip side of discovery. If the unknown didn't exist, nothing new would happen, ever. No learning would be possible, no advances in science and technology. We would already know everything that there would be to know and everything that we could possibly figure out about it. So that would be very different from conscious existence as we know it. And then the other two liabilities are based on our goals themselves. Here we have stagnation. Stagnation representing known barriers and obstacles within our own mind that prevent us from pursuing our goals. Procrastination, bad habits, unhealthy lifestyles, lack of self-discipline, stubbornness, willful ignorance, rigid thinking, resistance to change, addiction to change, anything that interferes with our ability to do something that we want, to work towards our own long-term interests. However, stagnation is also the flip side of identity. We know roughly who we're going to be when we wake up tomorrow morning, and that is a valuable part of conscious existence. Stagnation is just what happens when identity gets in the way of our actual goals. And then lastly, we have the fundamental liability of conflict, unpredictable obstacles in motivations or goals. It can be internal conflict or conflict between people. Goals can be mutually exclusive and we don't know whose goal will win. We don't know what we're going to decide because there are just so many things that we want. We don't know who is going to win in a conflict between people, political interests, violent factions, internal indecision, interpersonal disagreements, violence, deception. All of these are conflicts. But conflict is also a part of our world because it's a manifestation of choice. We consider ourselves to have free will because we don't know in advance which of our possible goals we will pursue and which ones we put on hold. As we learn about our own feelings in new situations, we choose how to respond to them. So the unknown triumph of one goal over another. And when this causes problems, we call it conflict. So that's the first set of concepts that we're working with right now. And so we get to our first exercise. So I'd like to go around the circle and we can think about what are some liabilities we recognize from our own lives. It can be an example that I've mentioned when describing these, or it can be something that I haven't mentioned. So I'd like us all to think about where we observe these, either in our own lives personally, or where we see them in the lives of people around us. So give a few minutes for people to think here. If you feel you've got one that you're comfortable talking about, you can just signal me or type in the chat.
I can start. It's not, I don't know how well developed it is, but I kind of stared at all of them for a while and I was trying to think, and they resonate, but I was having a hard time kind of thinking of examples. And I think it's because I was kind of caught in the, like, how none of these are necessarily good or bad. It's more of like having a balance. So we do need sometimes like a period of not stagnation. I guess that has a negative connotation, but like kind of like reflection, and then kind of moving on, or the scarcity part where like you might not have a lot, but then when you have something, it helps you, or when you have more, as opposed to scarcity, then you can appreciate that versus like always having it and not appreciating it. I was also thinking about conflict and how like we're always trying to avoid conflict, but in reality, like if we never had it, we wouldn't be able to grow as individuals. The same thing with disasters, I guess. So like all those words, although like at face value might seem like they might be, quote unquote bad, in reality, without them, we wouldn't be able to learn, or I don't know if that makes sense. If anybody wants to expand on that. So I was thinking of balance, basically, like we can't just like be in abundance always. We have to have abundance and then scarcity and then abundance and then scarcity to kind of like know. The same with all of the other ones, I think.
Well, these are all like known physical limitations, unknown physical limitations, known mental or goal-based limitations, unknown mental goal-based limitations. This is all just, what does the world look like? What do we know about and what don't we know about? What do we want and what don't we want? Or what do we want and what do we not know we want? The point is, though, that at some point or other, all of these can interfere with what we want, and they can become unhealthy. And these liabilities can feed each other or they can interfere with each other. But it's how we respond to them that makes a difference. And we'll get into that in just a bit. But I guess, for example, my example of a liability in my life would be stagnation, because I find that I often gravitate towards learning things that don't really matter to my life. They don't give me any extra skills or abilities, and that's okay, but I tend to do that when if I want to accomplish my goals, I should do a bit less of that and a bit more of doing things that have consequences so that I can make mistakes and learn from them. I've done most of the learning that I need to do for right now, and I should focus on applying. And making that switch is difficult for me because learning has become part of my identity. And so I need to overcome that barrier to pursuing my goals in order to avoid stagnation and become better at applying things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And we can go around the circle, I guess. Sheena, are you ready with an example you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so for my life specifically, I'm same, I would say stagnation. I'm very good at developing ideas and journaling and learning and growing. But there's a big difference between writing things down and actually putting them into play, you know? So I would say that would be one barrier in my life. When I first looked at these, I was thinking about humanity in general. And I'm glad that you mentioned how each liability has an opposite, right? So these are all, I love how they're called fundamental liabilities. When you quote unquote, when scarcity's there, well, then we become more, there's an interview that Brené Brown did with a man named Scott Sun and Shine. Yes, his last name is Sun and Shine. And he wrote this book called Stretch. And it's about our ability to do more with less. And so people who are used to having less learn how to be more creative and learn how to do more with less. But people who say work for a Fortune 500 company and are an entrepreneur and, you know, have all this money flooding in or whatever, they're a lot less stretchy. So when they bump into, say, a disaster or the unknown, which is inevitable in life, they're less stretchy. There's like, there's an inability to have that, you know, the ability to, you become set in a mentality of more. Conflict, I don't see how that, I'm really having a hard time with conflict. I'd like to learn more about conflict. I can't see, there's good in conflict. I'm having a hard time. I'm seeing that as being just more of a liability than anything else. Like, why do we need conflict? So learning more about that would be good. That being said, you know, I get in little arguments and everything, you know, in my life all the time, you know, especially with people like my, you know, that I'm with all the time. But that actually leads to more constructive conversations and an increase in skill that way. So thank you for introducing all of these. This is really, really interesting to our identities and useful. Thank you.
So the first thing that I reacted to was your description of disaster, where you don't know that something's there until you hit it. It's unknown, it's unpredictable. And this resonated with me on the level of like cross-cultural conflict, which is something I've been working on for like the last 25 or 30 years. And so for example, like as an interpreter, I'm constantly stepping in to explain one person's behavior to another person's behavior because they make no sense to each other, even though as a person who works in both cultures, Chinese and American, or Japanese and American, I'm like, oh, okay, what's going on here is this, and she's not mad at you, she's just really confused. Or so I think a lot of disaster on the intercultural level and a lot of conflict comes from people misunderstanding each other's motives or misunderstanding each other's behaviors. And with culture, we always say that cultural is invisible until there's a clash. Like until you don't know anything about your own culture until you come into conflict with people from other cultures who make your culture apparent to you. Otherwise, it's like a fish swimming in water. And so I thought, so it's easy for me to see how disasters can be revealing and useful because I've kind of been making use of them my entire life. Then when we talk about stagnation, the thing that is, I guess this is really salient for me now, is I have this house and I'm thinking that I would like to leave this house and go somewhere else. And the idea of like owning this house and, you know, using it as real estate income or something is, you know, appealing on some sort of cognitive level, but really deeply unappealing to my heart. I think because I lived in extreme scarcity at kind of a fundamental time in my life. When I lived in China, it was extremely poor. And I saw a lot of what Sheena's talking about from this book, Stretch, which I have not read, but this really resonated with me, what Sheena was saying about scarcity. People who live in scarcity are resilient and innovative and creative. And they, like, there was umbrella repairmen in China. There'd be these guys that they would repair your umbrella. And I just thought that was brilliant because you go to Japan and the minute an umbrella breaks, it's in the trash. And you're like, well, that's not necessary. So a big barrier that I have in my life now is I have all these possessions and most of them aren't like valuable possessions, but they're made of wood that came from the land that, you know, I don't want that in the landfill. I want someone else to be using it. Coming again from this relative scarcity, because in Japan also land is really scarce. People live much smaller. Their things are smaller. They don't fill their houses with stuff. Coming to the US and seeing the number of toys children had and the sense that, oh, it broke, out it goes. You know, would I even look for a repairman? No. Would I even try to use this thing that's broken? No. You know, my mother was constantly throwing my dish towels away because they had holes in them. And I'm like, they still dry the dishes. They don't need to go in the trash. So I have this tension between the American consumer culture and declutter and free yourself mentality with, you know, these are things that came from the earth in one way or another, and they're not disposable. How do I come to terms with this? So this is an internal conflict, but it's like really ongoing for me, and I'm unable to resolve it. And I think I get stagnated. I think I can't move on to the next step of my life until I figure out what to do with these things, you know, so that they're not in the landfill. So I think I kind of covered all of them and kind of understand all of them. But I really, Sheena, thank you for that business about stretch, because that like was my missing piece. I think Nancy already went, so I'll pass the talk piece to Abby.
Well, Nancy, did you have any examples now that we've gone through a few examples here? No? Okay.
Okay. Wow, this is, there's so much going on in my life, and putting them in the, like, in kind of relation to the fundamental liabilities, like, gives me a way to rethink my interpretation of events and my kind of thoughts about how I might proceed. And so I have so many thoughts and so many examples. But one thing that has come up recently, and I'll kind of talk about this in general terms, because you know, we share lessons, not stories. But you know, what's coming up currently in my life, seemingly over and over, is this idea of conflict, and based on fundamental misunderstandings of each other and our interpersonal like motivations and our goals. And verbal communication is such an important tool that we use to to like convey our messages, but we have no control over the filter with which that information is being perceived. So when I'm saying something, I have no idea like the vessel that I'm putting that into, right? So you and your brain is a vessel into which information is being put by others, and and by your environment. And I might have an assumption, like when I'm saying something or trying to communicate something, I have an intention, but where these fundamental liabilities are really kind of hitting home for me is that I don't know what's on the receiving end of that. And so the impact that I have with my words and my actions does not always match the intention that I had, because if I'm not aware of those motivations and those goals, right? That's where I feel like there's conflict consistently, is there's unpredictability in what those motivations and goals are, until you actually get to kind of dig in and start to get to know people. And that's where I feel like my life has been impacted so greatly, is that I feel like I've constantly been in this state of scarcity, or being worried about scarcity, right? So it's like I can't have nothing, so I must have everything. And so it's like that scarcity mindset kind of drives more like, I feel like fear-based responding, possibly, where it's just like I'm in this state of like I don't want to experience deprivation. I don't want to experience scarcity. And so I'm going to fight and strive to never have to have that feeling. But for me personally, it wasn't until that was all broken away by having everything taken, not of my own, and just kind of just being stripped down to nothing, where it was like, oh, I was so scared of that. And I was letting that fear drive me for so long that I didn't realize that it's like, well, that's not those things, those material possessions that's not what holds the value in my life. And being able to just like flip that mindset has been really powerful for me, and really in figuring out how to have more like deeper, more meaningful relationships with people who have differing values and differing perspectives, and being able to like honor and respect that, and not let that conflict like drive me out of those relationships. So lots of good stuff comes up. Well, I'm sure we'll have lots more time to talk about these things.
Thanks, everyone. Before we move to the next part, there's a couple of things that I want to touch on. Once the siren passes, I should probably clarify, when I refer to conflict as a liability, I don't just mean people have a misunderstanding and get into a fight based on that, like a romantic comedy or something. I mean, people want different things, and then they, as a group, have to decide, and we don't know what they're going to decide. Like, do we all go to the movies or to the zoo? Or a person says, should I take this class or should I take this other class? So it's things that people really do want, but they can't all get what they want. And so they have to decide either to take one of the options before them or to find a new option. Maybe that works better for everyone. So it's not a misunderstanding so much as people have different goals, and somewhere in goal space, one of those goals is going to actually get fulfilled, and we don't know what it is yet. The other thing is I wanted to mention that, Mary, you were getting at cultural conflicts based on differing levels of scarcity and how people do different things, whether they throw things out or whether they save them and repair them. That is something that's very relevant to the next set of concepts that we'll get to. So I did plan for this next set of concepts to be just the last thing that we talk about today. Tomorrow, or not tomorrow, next week, we will get to how these concepts tie in with the political compass and also what people can do to resolve these in a constructive manner. So I just want to reassure people that it's not going to be all doom and gloom. There is going to be solutions. It's just going to be next week. So for our next round of concepts, we will discuss how each of these liabilities has two responses that people tend to take. They're not necessarily the best responses, those come later, but two responses that most people choose to deal with them. And this, we'll be able to recognize this in our own lives as well. So every liability has an underregulated response and an overregulated response. Let's see, here we go. The 8 trade-offs. So we can't get rid of these liabilities, so we have to respond to them in some way. There's a healthy way to respond to each of these liabilities, but it is difficult. So most people, myself included, instinctively gravitate towards one of 2 trade-offs that each liability has. There are lesser ways to deal with each liability, and they all come with a price. So which one you use just depends on which price you're willing to pay, what risk you're willing to undertake. I don't really have pictures for these, so I can just go back to the ones that I had before. Here we go. Okay, so back to scarcity. Underregulated scarcity produces wastefulness. We disregard our known obstacles. We just toss away the resources that we would need to overcome them. So we ignore it. Underregulating a liability just means we treat it as though we don't really care. And so we see this in places where scarcity isn't really that visible or that prominent, like places with higher material prosperity. We might just throw away those the dish towels that have holes in them. But then there's the overregulated response, which is austerity. So we say we're aware that there's a barrier coming up, and we are going to hoard our resources in case we need them. And we forego the bulk of their benefits by using the bare minimum necessary to survive. So the two trade-off responses to scarcity are we just squander what we have, or we hoard it and we don't use it. We barely get the benefits, but it's there in case we need it, that sort of thing. So we can see that a lot of people try and balance those, but maybe they fall on one side or the other. Trade-offs for disaster. are the underregulated version, where we just ignore the possibility of disaster. We get negligence. We fail to anticipate what is most likely to go wrong. We run into obstacles head first. We don't try to anticipate anything. Pardon me. It's pretty straightforward. We make mistakes without trying to prevent them, that sort of thing. However, the overregulated version is susceptibility, where we avoid the unexpected, we hide from disaster, we don't do anything that we're not certain of, and that leaves us ill-equipped to deal with a crisis when it inevitably occurs, because we won't have the knowledge, skills, or confidence to respond to it effectively. So that's the trade-off there, is we're not going to regularly run into disasters, but when we do, we won't have any ability to deal with it. So both of these still incur the liability. It's just that they have different trade-offs, different risks, and different people are equipped to deal with them at different levels. And then here we have stagnation. Underregulated stagnation produces decadence. We just do whatever we want, whenever we want, and we succumb to addiction. We lose the ability to delay gratification for long-term or big picture gains. Decadence is we do what we feel and we lose our willpower, our self-control. However, we also have the overregulated stagnation, which produces dogma. We avoid addiction by limiting what we are allowed to think and feel. We imprison our minds in a theoretically safe place in order to prevent them from falling into a pit. But dogma can be torturous for people who don't naturally fit into it, and our thinking might not be able to update when the situation calls for it if we subscribe to dogma. So we sacrifice the ability to grow as people beyond a certain point. So that's the trade-off there. And then finally, the trade-offs for conflict. First, we have the underregulated conflict, which is turmoil. The strongest and the most ruthless do what they want. They use violence to get their way and to oppress everyone they can until they're defeated by somebody else. Turmoil is just a free-for-all. Then we can also overregulate conflict and get corruption, where we impose rules to try and prevent turmoil, except that the rules that we create to protect people from each other become the very weapons wielded by the powerful among us. So people engage in deception and secret deals, and they systematically align the rules or the resources, anything that gives them influence, they align those against the weak. And so we still have people being able to do what they want and to get their way. It's just that instead of violent, it's more regulated. It's the overregulated conflict. So that's those 8 trade-offs are the next set of concepts. And so for this next go round around the circle, I'd like us to think about where we see these in just anywhere we've seen them in our own lives or in the lives of others. Preferably something that we've experienced not indirectly. If the only example that you can think of is something that that you've read about somewhere on the news or somewhere far away, that'll work too. But I suspect it'll be easier to get a sense of it if we think about what we've seen ourselves somewhere. So, for instance, my example for this would be I tend to be I tend to lean on the side of austerity. And susceptibility, actually, in my personal life. I don't like to use resources because I think that I might need them later. So I want to stretch my resources, like Sheena and Mary were talking about. I like to stretch my resources as far as possible, so that I don't run out of them before I hit a wall. And then susceptibility, I also like to see what I'm doing before I do it, but that means that I don't necessarily get the experiences that would lead me to be able to deal with things that do happen. So that's something that I need to work on. And it's not that I need to lean more towards negligence or wastefulness. We'll talk about the next set of concepts that allow us to avoid these trade-offs entirely. But that just represents some of the inclinations towards trade-offs that I'm aware of in myself, if that makes sense. So do we think we're ready to go around the circle and talk about some of these trade-offs, or do you think we need a few minutes to think about where we might see them?
I could definitely use a few minutes to think.
Okay.
Yeah.
It take like maybe 5 minutes or when everyone's ready. All right, do we have some good examples of ways that we observe these concepts? Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Excellent. I already described how I see these in my own life. So, Sheena, did you want to start?
Sure. I have to admit, it was much easier to start with my observations of other people. And I was like, ooh, maybe I need to self-analyze a little bit. So that's where the majority of my thinking is self-analysis. But I'm really honing in on this disaster piece. If we want to put a word on 2020, a negative connotation word on the year 2020, it would be disaster. Because none of us could have predicted what has come our way in terms of the pandemic. So I'm kind of focusing in on the pandemic here, on COVID-19. And so my first thoughts and observations of others had to do with that austerity concept, when in the beginning, no one was prepared for this. So that's when we saw people hoarding things, like, and like toilet paper and, all of those stories. And I even know people to this day that have freezers, like deep freezers, that they have packed to the brim because they're very steeped into being prepared. And they now that they know that this happened, we don't know how long, none of us knows. So there's an example of austerity where they're really trying to preserve and not be wasteful, preserve their resources. In my home, I would say we've been doing this financially. So we sold a rental property, but we haven't done anything with that. We're like just keeping that there when everyone else is doing home projects all over the place and all of that has increased. We are gonna do a couple of things, but nothing major. Anyway, so that austerity piece, I've observed greatly with people. I have and then I question for myself, is there value in preparing for the unexpected? So if we don't, because there's so much about life, and you've probably heard me talk about this previously in other pieces of our discussion, but there's so much about life that's completely unpredictable. We have no control. So is it worth it to sit and be like, what could go wrong? What could be the unpredictable piece here? And is there value to preparing for something that we don't know? So I think about that. Or do you just, when we bump into that thing like this, that's when you create a plan that's going to work for you? But obviously the people, so I'm wondering who did better, because we never hoarded anything. We don't belong to a Costco membership or anything like that. And we just sort of bought what we needed when we needed it and tried to be safe about it. So, but I do think in the face of unknown, humanity has a tendency to want to increase the control because we like things to be predictable. And so another personal experience or also something I observed in others is just in leadership. So if you're a leader in a leadership role and pardon my French, but the shit hits the fan, like COVID-19, and you had no way to predict it and you weren't prepared for it, it ends up hurting a lot of people. So the reaction is to up the control as much as possible once it happens, and to try and get some sort of sense that, and making sense of and control of, because of a fear of loss. But that ends up hurting people because the increase of control from a leadership perspective has a negative impact on voices below them. And so people in leadership roles can lose sight of other perspectives. So I really honed in on that disaster piece. I am passing on to Mary. Mary, I'm dissing you. I'm so sorry.
Not a problem. I really struggled to think about this like on a really personal level. As soon as Alex started setting these out, my mind, like the scarcity in particular, my mind went directly to global warming, because we've underregulated and under-recognized this as a problem for centuries now, really, on a scale large and small. I remember going in graduate school, this would have been in the early 90s, going to a presentation on biomass, people burning biomass, like the leftover rice stalks, for example, in China. And some of the toxins in that. And my husband, I told my husband about it, and he immediately called home and said, don't let Xiaoming, Tao, and Mingming be in the kitchen while you're cooking, because they were using rice stalks and they were burning biomass, basically what was left over from the fields in the house. Who knew? You know, like, I mean, we kind of knew. Everybody else kind of knew, you know, it makes you cough, it makes you feel bad. And then on this much larger scale, we just kept expecting the planet to absorb it, even when we knew that wasn't true anymore. So I feel like there's this wastefulness, and then there's obviously on the other side, if we don't have energy of some kind, we will stagnate as a culture forward. Progress will slow down and stop. There'll be more poverty. I mean, this is also obviously a concern. So I mean, that's what struck me about that first point. Global warming then has led to a series of natural disasters. And I'm struck by, Sheena, I hope this is okay. I'm really struck by your choice of language. None of us could have predicted. None of us could have predicted, because I think that's manifestly untrue. What my experience with COVID-19 was that my daughter called me in January and said, "Okay, look, Mom, if you have medical appointments, get them over with, get them done. You know, if they're scheduled for April, move them up to February. Make sure you have masks in the house." And I bought up all kinds of wipes way back in February because the rationalist community predicted almost within weeks exactly what was going to happen, starting right away in January when the first reports started coming out of China, because we do have knowledge about these things. from previous SARS outbreaks, previous coronavirus outbreaks that happened in other parts of the world. And so that makes me think about the dogma thing. This was the one I had the hardest time understanding. Was overregulation of disaster. So if we worry too much about disasters, I think we can invest too much in preparedness. But there are things we know, like we know about global warming, that it is going to continue to get worse, and that we can predict with some accuracy the parts of the world that are going to be most affected and how they're going to be most affected. And this isn't something where you can go like, oh, look at the weather, global warming, today, but we do know what it looks like long term. But you don't want to overregulate, because that'll bring everything to a screeching halt. So I guess finding that sweet spot in the middle where we're honoring the data that we have, and we're honoring the statistics that we know have been run again and again, and we're honoring the information that we have without trying to panic people, without trying to tell people, no, you can't do these things that you've always done. But that kind of moves me to stagnation. Is this the one I don't understand? I don't even remember which one I don't understand.
Susceptibility?
Yeah, okay, conflicted. I guess the way I'm thinking about stagnation is instead of standing still, it's more like a body in motion remains in motion unless there's an opposing force. So I guess I'm thinking of it more as is that momentum, conservation of momentum? Yes. Okay, so political systems, cultures, societies, there's a momentum there. If you're used to taking a long vacation and flying somewhere every spring break, and you suddenly can't do that, that feels really painful. It feels like a loss because you've lost your momentum. That's your habit. But it's not like not being able to fly somewhere for spring break, probably not really a tragedy. It just feels really bad because it's something that we're used to having. And I think that that kind of, to me, that it seems like both decadence and dogma. I guess I'm really confused with stagnation, and I'll move on. No, I think it's time. Waste. I'm going to call waste and pass it off to Nancy.
So Nancy has to go last, so I will. So she will be right back.
Okay.
That's okay. It happened in the chat while you were talking. So the two that really kind of stood out to me and kind of evoked some, fast responses were the overregulation of stagnation and overregulation of disaster. So when Alex described overregulation of stagnation, he used words like dogma and stuck. And what I started to think about in application to my life is in relation to kind of my, chosen profession of behavioral science, and how much, my life was changed very dramatically by learning about behavioral science and neuroscience, and how the brain and the body work, and how how behavior and learning happen. But that knowledge and that experience created a very thick, very, I don't know, concrete lens with which I viewed the world. And so at some point, I feel as though I kind of got stuck in my thinking and my ability to really like listen and hear what's being said kind of outside of my box and outside of my realm. And so, believing that like the way that I see the world is the only way to see the world. And if it's not this, if you're not viewing the world through my lenses, then it's not even worth considering. And that kind of that overregulation and within that stagnation, I'm having trouble figuring out how to put those words together to make it all fit correctly. But it's, that has created in me kind of a stuckedness. And I see that more generally in our field and in any like group of people who have a strong belief system, that's based, that's founded on their knowledge and their experience and the information that they have been given. So that's kind of, that's where I've seen in my life that overregulation of stagnation. And then in relation to the overregulation of disaster, so Alex, in describing this, was, used words like susceptible and, we hide from disaster. And this is another concept that I've liked to think of myself as a planful person, but have found myself in situations, being hit with like that inevitable disaster. But in, reflecting back upon, well, why was I unprepared for this? It was, had seemed to do with just avoiding the conversation. Yes, I know that something bad is bound to happen, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to plan for it. We'll just when we get there, we'll deal with it. And so when I was thinking about this and writing it down, and then, Sheena, you said what you said about, it was unpredictable. And then Mary, I really, how you kind of reframed that. It made me think of a while back, I did a piece of writing that was like, this is a kind of my initial thought, and it was called The Collapse. And it started with like, we all knew it was coming. We had the data, basically it's like the general gist of like, we had the data, we knew it was coming, we saw it way ahead of time, but we just, pretended like that didn't exist or it didn't matter, and we didn't do anything different. So I feel like that, it's all kind of coming back around where, it's like, that's, a tendency I see in myself. And then also, as I've become more aware of the tendency in myself, I can feel like I can see it more out in the world, and how we're not even having the conversations. Like we don't have to beat a dead horse. We don't have to, be stagnated by planning for every, potential problem, but we should make some plans, maybe 3 potential options. So we have, so then there's not so much like ramp up time, right? And people having to, where I feel like right now we're in the situation where we're trying to solve a problem, but nobody is in the state of mind to effectively solve problems, because we're all in like, flipped lid state, and we're outside of our window of tolerance, and we're just like, oh, we know we have to fix something, but we don't know how. It's like, well, if we would have, come up with a plan when we were all like in a good place, it might not be as, significant, the impact that we're seeing. So that's all I got. And I'll pass it to Nancy.
Hello. So I don't know if my contribution is going to be as meaningful as the rest of y'all's. I think I've learned a lot from just listening, so I have enjoyed that part. One thing that I was thinking about was more with conflict, and I don't know why I keep going back to like the upside of things. I don't know if it's like the positive like side of me, but like looking at conflict that results in problem solving, or being solution oriented, or versus conflict that results in power trips or like power struggles, or being able to guide and solution oriented, or being guide others in being solution oriented can be difficult. So one of the examples that I was thinking about is like, for example, I supervise other people. I supervise their treatment of ABA, and for the most part, everything's pretty smooth. I try to come off and like supportive, and I want to be supportive. It's not just coming off like that, but like being supportive with other people, and like, but every once in a while there is that like unavoidable conflict where there's some sort of resistance to feedback, or resistance to and I mean, we all have it, but especially when you're a supervisor to supervisees, it might, you want people to want to grow and not see feedback as, confrontational or a personal attack. But basically what I've been doing a lot is kind of redirecting it. So like if there is some sort of conflict, and like, those words that somebody will use, like, I wasn't expecting that feedback. I guess I won't do that again. And they get into that defensive mode right away. And I was just thinking about like, how can I redirect that? I don't want them to feel defensive, And like I said, it doesn't happen as often because I've been doing this for a long time. But when it does happen, it's like, oh, I thought I was doing a good job providing that feedback. I don't want to engage in conflict. Like, I want all of us to be happy, like learning and happy and everything. And then, but what I've learned is that I can't avoid it, right? Like, I have to be empathetic and compassionate, but direct. And I think like when they see that I'm not coming from like an ego trip, or sort of like where like you can shift it from a power struggle to like, I'm here to support you, like I'm here to help you, like when you're successful, I'm successful. And like, but that's hard to do sometimes, especially if when they feel like they're getting feedback and they take it as a personal attack, then they start kind of attacking you. That's when the supervisor needs to be the bigger person. I know that sounds awful. The supervisor needs to be in the more empathetic role and seeing like, oh, like they felt personally attacked and I don't want them to feel that way. How else can I reframe this? I don't know. I guess I'm applying it to my daily activities or my job. Like I said, I think when I started as a supervisor, that kind of struggle was a little harder to deal with. Now it's a lot easier for me. But every once in a while, like now that it happens less often, when it does happen, like I'm taken more aback than I used to because I don't expect it anymore. But I don't know. I guess that conflict part. And then every time that I come out on the other side, and we both come out on the other side, like with, me and my supervisee, and then they're like, you know what? I really learned from that. And that's when it's like, okay, that was worth it. And I'm glad that I was able to redirect it. I don't know. I was just thinking more about like that conflict there, more like on an individual level. Oh, somebody said, was it recommending supervising dynamically with Scott? Oh yeah, I love his stuff. I teach supervision course for a university online, and I'm glad that I am because I've been learning along the way as well. And that's I haven't read that one, but I really need to look into it. Thank you for recommending it. let's see. I was just reading some of the comments to see if I missed anything. But yeah, basically just like, am I going to see conflict? Am I going to see it as, oh, this is awful and I need to escape and avoid it? Or like, this is an opportunity for me to grow as supervisor, and this is an opportunity for them to grow as supervisees. And then maybe sometimes I just need a supervisor myself. So like somebody telling me, you know, we operate a small business. So like, I try to get other people's input. Like, how does this look when I say this, right? Or what is a better way to say this or do things so that I'm being an agent for positive change instead of creating unnecessary conflict. So like, I feel like conflict's okay, but unnecessary or hurtful conflict, like being more solution oriented versus getting like personally attacked by it, basically. When somebody doesn't want to take my feedback or is being resistant to feedback. Anyway, I'll stop there. I hope that made sense.
Definitely. Thanks so much, everyone, for sharing where you see the liabilities and the trade-offs in our own lives here. And pardon me. So all of these liabilities and trade-offs, in the next meeting, we will discuss how they describe the different political perspectives and factions that people find themselves on at one point or another, and all the different nuances that we can see in those positions, even when people tend to gloss over those. We'll also talk about the constructive ways that people can deal with these liabilities while avoiding the trade-offs. Some of those have actually been mentioned here, so just to get some closure for this meeting, may as well just go over what the 4 virtues are that deal with the liabilities. Then we can discuss those in more detail next week. We've got, for dealing with scarcity, investment. So it's not wasting resources, but it's also not hoarding them. It's investing resources, being able to spend them on things which then yield more prosperity, more plenitude as an outcome. And so, like all of the virtues, this is actually very tricky, trying to figure out what to invest in, what is the best way to apply resources in order to get more benefit and overcome scarcity. But it's the direction that we'll probably want to go in, as opposed to wastefulness or austerity. And then for disaster, we do have preparation, and it's not the same thing as trying to predict everything in advance. I need to update the article because I refer to it in the article as exposure, but my cohort in Ohio recommended that I change it because preparation has more of the positive connotations. Preparation being, yes, we can anticipate some things based on the data, but some things we can't. So we just have to figure out, where are we vulnerable? And we don't need to know what could hurt us if we know where we can be hurt. And so we prepare contingencies. We do a bit of investment for that. And we practice. We practice dealing with what happens if something shuts down without knowing what could cause it. That sort of thing. For stagnation, we have transcendence. We have the ability to go beyond who we are by practicing discipline and at the same time expanding our mind to new ideas while being able to handle them in a healthy manner. And for conflict, we have ethics, being able to reconcile differences in goals and willingness to accept risks while not oppressing anyone. So we'll go over that and actually do some exercises with that in the next meeting, but I figured that since we were already talking about some of those things, I wanted to make sure that people are aware, yes, this isn't all doom and gloom here. And we still have about 8 minutes left over. So, are there any thoughts that people have about what they're looking forward to, or feedback on what was presented in an obscure or confusing manner this time? I know we said stagnation was a bit confusing, so I may need to explain more, with some more examples, what that means.
I have something that's completely unrelated, but more just a personal question aimed at you. Are you comfortable answering a question?
Sure.
Okay. What led you to have your current philosophical perspectives? Is that too big of a question?
Well, let's see, just to make sure I understand, do you mean what led me to build these concepts, or what led me to tend to implement some of the concepts more than others?
This is more when you introduce yourself as an existentialist. Is that right?
Existentialist. Yep.
Existentialist, yes. Because I would say from a philosophical perspective, I'm most familiar with Stoicism, and I would like to have a philosophical conversation with you at some point, just for funsies, because I think it'd be fun. But I'm curious as to how you arrived at your current, existentialist philosophical perspective.
That's a good question. I guess it's kind of a gradual process throughout high school and maybe a bit into college as well. Existentialism, I just like to sum up existentialism by quoting Forrest Gump. Just for like you pick a noun, just any concept. Like that concept is as that concept does. That's what it is. It doesn't have like if it doesn't do anything, then it can't really have an essential nature. That's just the existentialist thing. Existence precedes essence. So all I mean by that when I call myself that is I judge things based on what they do, and I don't claim that something just is good or is bad without seeing how it affects people, that sort of thing. So that's the short answer. Does that make sense? And then this actually began, like these concepts right here, you may have noticed that they began as a vanity project to try and take the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and just match them onto some useful existential concepts, something applicable, because I just thought it was a really cool theme and I wanted it to mean something. And it turned out to actually be incredibly useful, because now I can describe all problems in terms of one or more of these concepts, and I can describe how people deal with these concepts and how that brings them into opposition with each other and what we can do about that. So by naming all of these problems, I'm hoping that we can actually deal with them in a healthy manner, because our mistakes are getting bigger as we get more technology and more coordination with each other. And so we're going to have to start learning from them before we make them. Anything else that people want to talk about? Just thoughts about anything in general or the concepts? Going once? Going twice?
Okay.
All right,
So,
so it sounds like, very good.
sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, it sounds like we can probably wrap up here, at least with the recording, but I can stick around and just chat with people. So thanks so much for attending. Thanks everyone for offering your thoughts and feelings, and we'll deal with how this applies to politics, and we'll get more into those virtues for avoiding trade-offs next week.
Thank you so much, Alex. This has been a very thought-evoking and inspiring conversation to, really put a different framework around things that we already kind of know on a human level, but don't necessarily have the language to talk about and do something different with. And I just will kind of leave us today with a, putting this into reference to, human interactions and where we're going. And how this applies to, I'm always trying to think about how this ties into what we've learned as from behaviorists and from a behaviorist point of view, where I find such great value in the work that you do, Alex, is that you create relational frames for people using language that they might not necessarily connect with because their thoughts about things are over here, and kind of we need to kind of get to this point, and the language and the framework that you provide, I feel, creates that bridge for people, those illusions or the illustrations of the concepts, using frames of reference that people are very familiar with on a basic level within our, culturally and within our society, things that we've learned and we've heard about from the time we were children, and putting them, kind of reframing them so we can think about things differently and talk about things differently. So there's such huge value in this, especially when it comes to having a more broad impact on the world and the conversations we're having. So I thank you immensely for the work that you have done already, and I'm so excited to see what the future holds for you and for us. So thank you for that. And with that, we will sign off and move into a little bit of social time afterwards. But if you are not able to join us, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next weekend for our second gathering.